My first guest in the program is James Brown, non-resident fellow at the US Studies Centre. James, thanks very much for your time. Let's start on the New York Times. They've endorsed two Democratic candidates. I thought you were meant to endorse one. Maybe it's a bit like the Melbourne Cup. You want a couple of runners to give yourself a bigger chance. But one of the people endorsed, James, is a pretty unexpected name, I think, to most people, or an unknown one almost.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. The Democrat Party is so divided that even the New York Times can't pick who should be leading it. And they acknowledge that in their analysis. They basically say there is a split in the party and that question needs to be resolved, and it's playing out through the primary process. For the first time in 160 years, they've chosen two candidates to endorse. Elizabeth Warren, who they think is a gifted storyteller who is diagnosing the fault lines in America and what voters want very well, but they do have some concerns about her policies and her ability to reach across the aisle. And Amy Klobuchar, who is an unexpected choice, but they say she's got the legislative credibility, she's a more moderate member of the Democrat Party, and she can actually point to a track record of success and could well rebuild new bipartisan coalitions if she's elected to be president. But that one, certainly a surprising choice.
Maybe surprising. I mean, I think a lot of people might have to look her up. We'll see perhaps if she's elevated to sort of contender status after a couple of primaries. But would she be a better fit to go up against Donald Trump than Elizabeth Warren?
Well, she hasn't really engaged with President Trump, and she hasn't had that contest in the way that Elizabeth Warren has. Elizabeth Warren's been in his sights. They're both senators. They've both got a degree of experience. Amy Klobuchar's younger than Elizabeth Warren, less bookish, and has a different presence. She's a much more centrist and moderate presence than Elizabeth Warren. Could she go up against the president? There's no signs that she couldn't. She has been a tough contender in the debate so far, and she has held her ground. It'll be interesting to see how she goes in Iowa in 2 weeks' time. She's not expected to be amongst the top finishers there, but this may give her some momentum.
Donald Trump, meanwhile, his focus will be at Davos, this economic forum. Last time his speech there got a lot of headlines, James Brown. It basically presaged the trade war. So what are we expecting this time around?
Well, it could go one of two ways. It could be a victory lap for the president, who's renegotiated his trade deal with China, although that deal does look to be much weaker than the United States had hoped for. He may point to what he's going to do with the EU. There's been trade tensions between the US and the EU, and I certainly think, given the president's nature, he will absolutely have some commentary on the impeachment process that's playing out at the moment.
It's an interesting sort of forum for optics, of course. It's always spoken about as one for the elites. I was reading today, companies to get one seat there pay something in the order of 70,000 Australian dollars, and something about water bottles being $20 per go. Maybe that helps out on sustainability, because you'd be drinking out of the tap, I reckon. But this year, a very different focus. Apparently the streets plastered with climate change posters, and it's going to be a huge focus for them.
Well, look, hopefully those posters offset the emissions from the private jets. But this is probably not the sort of gathering you or I or any of our mates are going to. But it does set the agenda for the year ahead. I mean, it's all those key leaders, both in the business community and in politics, coming together to map out an agenda. And we've seen significant speeches there in recent years. President Trump's previous speech, Xi Jinping's speech a few years ago, which was remarkably lauded by the leaders at Davos. So, I mean, you can imagine the key themes this year. People will be focused on where the US election is going. They'll be focused on trade. I think they'll be focused too on the role of technology and how you either curb or liberalise technology and its role on politics and everyday life.
And just finally on the impeachment, the White House strategy here, a pretty familiar one, that attack is the best form of defence, saying it's not even valid, this impeachment process. But I found this a bit odd. The justification is one of the defence team saying, even if it's true, it doesn't amount to impeachment. It's interesting, you open the door to it being true just by saying that.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see more and more Republican senators come to this position that, OK, the president may have done things that you don't agree with. He may have even withheld the aid, or he may have pushed for that investigation. We're willing to accept those facts. but it's within his powers. That's what he was elected to do. And what he has done here, although it might be wrong, you might have to hold your nose as you walk past it, it's not sufficient to reach the threshold of high crime and misdemeanour and something that should see him removed from office. That's essentially the argument that this White House paper released today takes. They're saying, let's push this to be a speedy trial, no witnesses, get it over and done with. Of course, the Democrats will want more witnesses to be introduced, and we'll have that debate in a couple of days' time.
It's an interesting strategy. I mean, I guess with a lot of normal elections, if you think of that sort of concession that, yes, I withheld the aid and I was hoping it would help me out politically, but you can't impeach me on it, that it would be a disaster at the ballot box. But this, again, like the last one, won't be a regular election in that sense.
Well, not at all, and of course this is all relative because the President can point to Hunter Biden, and you can bet that if additional witnesses are called for this Senate impeachment trial, Hunter Biden will be one of those called, and you know, he can essentially point to his behaviour and say this is all relative to what's happening in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it's a good point. It gives them that avenue. Just interesting, finally, James, to note an attorney from part of O.J. Simpson's defence trial is part of the Trump team. Do we read anything into that? Just a tidbit?
Look, that was a trial that played itself out on TV, so I imagine the President's very excited about having lawyers who understand how to play to a TV audience. I mean, there's a lot of familiar players in the teams here. We're seeing Kenneth Starr coming back, who featured so prominently in the investigation and impeachment of Bill Clinton. It's going to be a show, whether it's quick or long, and in the middle of it, the President gets to jump up and do the State of the Union speech. He has an enormous platform that'll surely impact on how the trial is perceived.